here. Good.
Hey, no question about that.
We good to go?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
All right, I'll call this planning committee meeting for the Qathet Regional District to order for May 3rd already, 2023. Good. Welcome everybody and those attending virtually. Recognize we're holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the Tla'amin Nation. Second order of business is adoption of the agenda. Do I motion to adopt the agenda? So, Gisborne. I'm sorry, what's your last name?
Follow.
Follow, thank you. I'm gonna write that down because I'll forget. Thank you. Second. Yes, but it's facing the other way. Any discussion on the agenda? All in favor? Motion's carried. Move to the adoption of the minutes. Are there any errors or omissions in the minutes? We'd like to move the adoption of the minutes. Director Gisborne, secondary, Director Brander, all in favor? Opposed. Motion's carried. Delegation and inquiries. Do we have no registered delegation? Do we have any unregistered delegations?
At this time, I'm not seeing any unregistered delegations present.
Okay. If so, would we come back to that later if it's appropriate?
That would be up to the membership.
All right. So we'll move on to, I don't see any unfinished business. No course, let's see, I better check the actual minutes, not my notes. No correspondence, therefore no business arising. We move to reports. 8.1. We have a recommendation in front of us. How do we wish to proceed?
Well, I'll move the motion to get us.
Discussion.
Well, this is about the Texada Island Community Watershed zoning bylaw, so I don't want to steal Director Hollow's thunder. He wants to jump in on this. My one question, and this is something I like, and it's on page 11 of 34 of the report itself, and it has total floor area. So it includes total floor area in the zoning bylaw. And that, here we go, means the total area of all floors of all stories contained within the exterior walls of a building or structure. And I see that language in the zoning bylaw, and I'm wondering, is there language like that in the official community plan, or is it only in the zoning bylaw? Through the chair, yes. Question to staff.
Ms. Rodden, can you answer that for us?
Yes, Chair. Through the chair, it is not, that language is not in the official community plan. That's specific to the zoning. And it carries forward from the current bylaw that was adopted in the 90s.
Oh, very cool. I like that language in this zoning bylaw. And when we get to, sorry, I'm still waking up. 8.3, I'm going to talk more about that kind of principle. So that's my thoughts on it.
Thank you. Any other? Mr. Hollow.
I just wanted to say the public information meeting went really well on this subject, and the engagement that came back from that meeting was very informative, very productive, and I was very pleased that the community took a bit of ownership in contributing to this new zoning bylaw.
Thank you for your comments. Any other questions, concerns? All right. Do I need to restate the motion? State the motion for folks? No? So we'll say all those in favor of the motion. None opposed. Motion is carried. Thank you.
And I'll move part 2, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry, can we fill in the blank?
Yes, we need to do that.
Oh, yes.
We need to have a
Director
second
Hollow?
before
No,
fill in the
well,
blanks.
we-
Discussion first.
let's,
Okay, Director Hollow.
I would like, I'm filling in the blanks for the Director McCormick, chair for the public hearing.
and,
Okay, so
and which, sorry, Chair, we need
Yes.
3 directors to be appointed as well.
okay, do we have any volunteers or any suggestions?
Do we have a date?
That's a good question. Yes, Ms. Rodden, do we have any proposed dates for this activity?
Through the chair, it was included in the conclusion of the report that once the resolution goes to the board meeting at the end of the month, staff will reach out to the committee members and select a date, and it'll be based on our notice requirements under the Local Government Act and our public hearing policy. So no date is set yet.
Okay, thank you. And it does look to be 3 positions. Well, I'll volunteer myself for one of those positions. Anyone else?
I'll volunteer.
Director Gisborne
And I presume the third one would be.
would be McCormick as well. Let's do that. Perfect.
I think we're in a position to move in second.
All right, so I think Director Gisborne moved. Motion and Director Brandard seconded. Sure. Thank you. Any further discussion on the matter? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. All right, 8.2. This is regarding referral to the Mines Act for activities at St. Vincent's Bay in Electoral Area C. I'll move the recommendation. Thank you. Have a second. Okay, Holland, thank you, Director Holland. All right, any discussion on the matter?
Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I read the report as well, and very clear the intent and some of the requirements that we're asking for. So without any further discussion, I'll move the motion. All those in favor? Thank you. It's carried. Moving right along to 8.3. So this is the draft amending bylaws for the QRD's electoral area A, B, and C official community plans. We have 3 recommendations. Do we just do them separately or yes? Okay. I'll move the first motion. Have a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Director
Discussion.
Gisborne. Discussion.
Sorry.
Yes, Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I've been thinking about how to move forward with these proposed amendments. We're talking just right now about Area A official community plan. We'll get to Area B later. Now, reading the proposed bylaws, there's some things in here that I really like. You know, saying, okay, we're not going to restrict the number of dwelling units, which is something I've been going on about for some time. I apologize if sometimes I sound like a broken record. So I like that aspect of the proposed bylaw change. However, I have some concerns because it looks like there isn't really much to replace it in terms of controlling density. I know we've talked about total floor area in the past. That was something that I would really like to see as an option. And I would also like to see, you know, total floor area with different specifics in relation to each area, because we've got rural residential, we've got low density residential, we've got suburban residential. And if we change the OCP to say, you know, you can have as many dwellings as you want in all of these areas, well, then you can have an area that's rural residential where suddenly someone starts, you know, going right to the property line and building the whole thing out. And that's where when you switch from going, you know, single family dwelling or, you know, single family dwelling in a granny cabin, you want to still have some other kind of parameter. And I think what we just saw with the Texada Island Community Watershed zoning bylaw. They've got language in there for total floor area. And I think we could do the same thing for the OCPs when we start switching from, you know, you can have one dwelling to as many as you want, because most of us in the rural area, we got a well, we got a septic field, and therefore there's quite a bit of setback, and you can really only do so much. But some folks have been able to, you know, have one well and just a holding tank, so that way they can increase their, you know, their floors, their total floor area. So I'm wondering if we should maybe kick this back to staff and ask for options to control the density in some of these more rural areas. The option of total floor area, and then rather than going to you know, public information, I think we should go to actually public engagement, because this can be a really big change. And when we get to Area B's official community plan, I'll talk a bit more in context of some of Area B's zoning bylaws, because Area A is, well, Director Lennox's area, and I'm not as up to speed on Area A's zoning bylaws. So I'm not entirely sure how this change would affect the Area A zoning bylaws. So I'm not entirely sure how to move forward, but I think we should send it back to staff and ask for, you know, some options for total floor area and other ways to actually make sure rural areas can somewhat stay rural under this new context, if that makes sense.
Director Branner, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I can appreciate, I don't know what Director Gisborne is saying, but I also want to make a comment that I think the purpose, and maybe I'm off base, Ms. Rodden can correct me if she sees fit, but I didn't see this as being a deep dive into the OCPs. It was more, from what I recall, the direction was more to bring the OCPs kind of into line with each other, to have similar definitions. So we have continuity across them. And when the time comes when one of these OCPs is up for renewal, then maybe that's the opportunity to dig deeper into the minutiae, into the square footage of the different varieties of zoned areas. They're not zoned, but so I don't know if that's the intent of what we told the planning department to do. So I'm quite happy with the changes that I see in the OCP. The one question I have though was throughout, and this is for staff through the chair, throughout the document we see the quote, subject to proof of water and sewer servicing that meets provincial standards. And I guess I'm kind of curious what those are, if that means it goes back to the Vancouver Coastal Health Standards, and if so, could we have them somewhere in there so that it's easy for readers to find?
Okay, we've got a couple of questions I'm going to add to the discussion, and maybe our planning department can edify us here regarding the question Director Brander had, but also I have some of the same questions around options, and I'm also not exactly sure how to proceed. I'm quite in favor of this provides more flexibility for the residents, and in my area, we're looking at the first recommendation for Area A, and so I think I understand the intent, and we are trying to align, and so I don't want to lose the opportunity to become aligned and to have more flexibility. But again, you know, since I've come on the board, we've been talking about different options as far as land use planning and sort of expanding upon that. And I was a little bit surprised just to see a narrow focus in this particular recommendation. Again, I understand why. So maybe, Ms. Rodden, if you're the right person to maybe chat about how we came to where we are.
Through the chair.
Thank you.
Yes, I can respond to those questions. So the purpose of the report, I mean, the report builds on work that staff did back in June of 2022. And I did include a link to that report in this report. And so there were a number of next steps identified in that report, areas, specific areas in the OCPs that were going to be looked at and built into the amending bylaws that have been proposed. And the work itself, the purpose of it, it really responds to the qathet Regional Housing Needs Report that was done in 2021 that identified that secondary suites and 1 and 2 bedroom accessory dwelling units were an important source of housing for people in the area, for rental housing. And the work also responded to what we heard when we engaged with the communities across the areas A, B, and C in the Let's Talk land use engagement and in the Random Road and Douglas Bay zoning bylaw processes. So what we heard from people is that they wanted the ability to have an accessory dwelling unit on their property. Some of the reasons being their kids were moving back to the region after being away to school or work, and they were relocating back home in Powell River, and they couldn't afford to buy a house, or they couldn't find rental housing, and they wanted the ability to keep family members on the property. Other examples were younger people whose parents were aging, wanted to be able to build an accessory dwelling unit for their parents. Other were seniors that wanted the ability to have an accessory dwelling unit for care worker to be living on the property and help them so they could age in place. And the other was for to have rental housing, to have some income to help pay down a mortgage or support taxes and for people on fixed incomes. So there was a variety of reasons, but the work responds to those sort of 3 key areas: the housing needs report, the engagement in the Let's Talk land use, and the engagement in the zoning bylaw processes. And the purpose was to look at the OCPs, to provide some room for flexibility to allow for accessory dwelling units, providing it's feasible on the property, feasible being you can provide the servicing. And because the newer OCP that was developed for Texada Island has some very clear policy language that provides that flexibility. When we brought the report forward in June, we highlighted that, and the recommendation was to prepare the amending bylaws for areas A, B, and C OCPs based on that policy language that simplifies it. And largely, there is no zoning regulation for the regional district to be able to regulate density. There's no building bylaw for us to be able to regulate the size of homes or where homes are built. And so these are policy statements. And I will say there is a trend in the province right now, particularly in rural regional districts, to take this approach. And so we're not alone. And there also are provincial directives coming forward through legislation soon and highlighted in the Homes for People strategy that staff have included as an FYI on this agenda, where the province will be expecting local governments to create this type of flexibility.
Okay, thanks for your answer. Maybe just to answer Director Brander's specific question around the wording around subject to proof of water and sewer servicing that meets provincial standards. That seems like a broader expectation of like that's definitive, and just wondering that seems like it's on purpose. Is that?
Yes, it's intentional. It's the same approach as was used in the Texada Island official community plan. This would be a consistent approach across the region. It's the approach that planning staff take when we talk to people, that for servicing, you need to talk to Vancouver Coastal Health, or you need to talk to your improvement district, or in the rare cases like Myrtle Pond and Lund, RD approvals. But yeah, it just simplifies the language. It's clear. It's easier for people to understand.
Follow up, Dr. Gisborne.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Rodden, for that. I agree with, we need residential flexibility. The language of this, where is it here? I'm looking at area A's. The maximum number of dwellings or service buildings per parcel is based on proof of water and sewer servicing that meets provincial standards. That is replacing parcels serviced by an individual well and on-site septic. Maximum number of dwellings or service buildings per parcel for development purposes shall be one dwelling or service building per parcel up to 1 hectare in area plus one dwelling or service building for each additional 1 hectare of land. So we're going from, at least in this section, which is Lund Village Center policies, just as an example, going from 1 dwelling per hectare up to as many dwellings as you want, as long as you're consistent with Vancouver Coastal Health's requirements. I see that as a big change, and we do have zoning bylaws in parts of our electoral areas. Area B has 3, Traff, Myrtle Pond, and Nootka. Nootka is going to be interesting because the only thing, as I understand that zoning bylaw does, is say 1 dwelling per hectare. And if we then change the OCP to say you can have as many dwellings as you want, as long as you're conforming with Vancouver Coastal Health requirements, then we have a zoning bylaw that's inconsistent with the OCP. And that has me some concern because the provincial government changed legislation to say the regional district can change a zoning bylaw. And as long as it's consistent with the OCP language, we don't have to do public engagement. We can just change it. So that's going to get, I think, some people a little nervous up on Nootka. So that's where I would like some options for how to control growth in areas where we are actually concerned about urban sprawl. And Nootka is one of those areas where sprawl has been a concern since 1999 when that zoning bylaw came into effect. So my question is, what is the way forward to ask our staff for those options? That way, the areas that we do have those zoning bylaws, there is still, something that replaces, that level of control. Otherwise, people are going to go, well, what's the point of even having the zoning bylaw? So
I just want to see Ms. Rodden, you have a comment on this.
Yes. The zoning bylaws are by nature more restrictive than an OCP. And these official community plan amendments will not trigger the need to do zoning amendments to align with the OCP because a zoning bylaw can be more restrictive. And so those density restrictions in the Nootka Street zoning bylaw and the watersheds and all the other zoning bylaws, if the board so desires and directs staff to review them and look for flexibility in those, that could be a direction. But these OCP amendments are not going to trigger the need to review and amend the zoning.
Director Gisborne will give you another.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe there's some confusion. I didn't say that the zoning bylaw would change with the OCP. What I mean is, if we change the OCP so that you can have as many dwellings as you want, and a developer comes to us and says, hey, the OCP says I can have all these dwellings, but the zoning bylaw says I can't, and they put in an application to change the zoning bylaw, there is no requirement for us, the regional district, to have it go to public engagement. My understanding of the provincial government's legislative changes is that we can change the zoning bylaw, even if it's just for one property, without public engagement. And that's, I think, gonna concern some folks. So the OCP is the guiding document, and the zoning bylaws tend to follow the OCP's guidelines. So that's where I'm still asking for, a floor area ratio as an option, and use that in place of, limiting the number of dwellings. And, I think a few months ago, I mentioned 5,000 square feet could be the replacement for the dwelling unit, because that's what ALR is like. But I would like to hear from, the general public, because the ALR is only looking at the residential total floor area, not the whole property floor area, because you got farm buildings and shops and all the other things, and they don't count under the ALR rules. So maybe, I'm just going to pull a number out, maybe 10,000 square feet could be used in placement of, the dwelling density, because they're different for each area. Suburban residential has, certain density for each dwelling, and it goes up for rural residential. So that's still my same question: is how do I ask for the staff to bring forward the option to have total floor area when we go to talk to the public?
Mr. Rodden, I see your hand up, and first question was, I guess, is it true the zoning bylaw can change without public engagement? And then the question Director Gisborne's asking about options.
Through the chair, changes to a zoning bylaw, if it's changing use or density, require a public hearing. Under the changes to the Local Government Act, the board could decide to waive the public hearing, but it's a board decision. And that decision would need to be made before first reading of whatever the bylaw is that is being considered. So it's at the board's discretion, but I mean, any changes to use or density require a public hearing. That was the first answer to the first question. And could you repeat the second question?
Well, just my summary is Director Gisborne, I'm still looking for a way for staff to report on options around density. And he's made some suggestions on how that would look. But again, I think it's more just the awareness of options to be more definitive to protect some of that, concerns around density.
Yeah, the metric for density is number of dwellings. That's used across the province, around the world. That's the metric that gets used. How many homes are on a property? And floor area can be regulated through a zoning bylaw or through a building bylaw. But we don't have either in most areas. We have zoning in some areas. And if Director Gisborne would like floor area restrictions to be considered, I would suggest that would be appropriate in a zoning bylaw review and update or a zoning bylaw development. I don't think, well, I don't know. I would ask whether there's an interest in complementary zoning to the work that staff is doing, and that would be a whole separate work area. But my understanding is the direction to staff was simply to do a OCP review looking at secondary suites, accessory dwelling units, and having a consistent approach across the region. And that's, yeah, I think I answered the question.
Yeah, I think I understand that floor area can be regulated through bylaw. Simplest version. Any other directors have comments? Because I'm going to give you another one just so we can get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, just so we can get to the bottom of this. I really think total floor area can be used as a policy in the OCP, because when it comes to time of subdivision, in the past, what the current status is, is the number of dwellings on a parcel at time of subdivision comes into effect. So if someone has, got a 40 hectare property and it says 1 dwelling per hectare, and they've taken, 40 manufactured homes and crammed them all into one area. Well, if they go to subdivide that section off, then we can look at that and go like, hold on, you're going to end up with, 1 parcel with a whole bunch of dwellings. And that's now going to be kind of inconsistent with our OCP and, potentially our zoning bylaw if you're in a zoned area. So that's where I would still like to see some level of policy recommendation around, what the density is in the rural areas, because as our planner said, density is the number of dwellings. And when you take a look at the OCP and it says low density residential, but our OCP says you can have as many dwellings as you want, well, then how is it still low density residential? And that's where I'm a little confused. And my understanding from the OCP and zoning and all that stuff is from the provincial government on their site. It says a local government is not required to hold a public hearing if a proposed zoning bylaw is consistent with the official community plan in effect for the area. For changing density, I would like to see those things go to public hearing, but as I heard, it's a board decision. And we got to keep in mind that, governments and elected officials are kind of like schizophrenic roommates. We can change every 4 years. And so the decision that we make today can have, decades of impact. And it doesn't mean that we're all going to be here. It might be someone else that goes, hey, we'll just move this along. And the public gets upset and they go, well, the previous board made this change. So I would like to see the policy for total floor area ratio that governs density in the electoral areas.
Well, we have a recommendation before us. So do you have an amendment to this recommendation? Yeah, to speak. Yes, sure. See, so that what you were trying to do is get my attention. All right.
Through the chair. I think we should focus back on what the purpose of this report was for. And I think we should all be considering the alignment of this proposal of all of the OCPs so that they're all in continuity with one another. And I think we've been around the table enough to now hear that most, if not all, of the reservations, concerns, and hesitations about this do have a backstop, which is the board. Whether it's the board today, the board of tomorrow, or the board of 20 years hence, if the current bylaw lasts that long. But it all falls back on the board, and the board is responsive to the people. So you can't foresee what's going to happen 20, 30 years from now if the board changes, if the board remains the same. It's the board's decision based on whatever input they're getting from their representatives or residents of that day. So I would suggest that, again, focus on what is before you and why it's being done, i.e. to align and make everything in continuity. And if there's still a desire to move forward with more prescriptive things in the OCP, then I think we need to consider and respect that A, this is what this report is for. B, what the work plan for 2023 is. C, we're already into May, and therefore each individual area director should maybe go and assess what, I guess, necessity, priority, etc., how urgent it is to get that on the work plan. Because right now, I don't think it would fit into the 2023 work plan. This is already before you and ready to go. But anything more prescriptive, I think, needs to be planned out. And I think that each individual director needs to ascertain what that importance is to them in their area. And perhaps it should then be reflective of all areas. But I think that's the end run, is that we've got this before us. Anything more prescriptive has to be in a work plan, and we're already into May.
Thank you for your comments, CAO. All right, I guess we're gonna move to the recommendation in front of us. A note.
No, just call in, get ready to.
I'm still asking for, how do I put forward that, like the language of that motion or amendment?
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know that it is. If you wanted it to be included in this work that's currently being done, potentially, you know, that would require referring back to staff with that direction. I think.
Yeah, I would like to refer this back to staff and ask for options. And the option I would like to see is total floor area as the replacement for the dwelling unit. And through the chair, in January and February, I brought this issue up about removing the number of dwellings and replacing it with total floor area ratio. And then we didn't need a resolution because I was informed that this was going to be coming forward in a staff report. But there is nothing in here about total floor area ratio in this staff report. So that's where I'm I guess a little frustrated or confused, because January and February we talked about having total floor area ratio, and my understanding was that we were going to see that item in the upcoming staff report. And well, I see this staff report, but it doesn't cover those options that we discussed, and I would like to see that as an option.
Thank you. Through the chair. Section 4.65 allows a member to refer to staff when a motion is on the table. So that's how that would be in order to refer this to staff with the wording that you desire. That is in order.
Okay. I would move that we refer it to staff, requesting language for total floor area. With options.
I'll second the motion. Discussion?
Yeah, and if there's anyone else with any other kind of options that they're looking for, and I don't think this should be a ton of work for our staff. It's just, you know, kind of like a one policy line that can then be guiding for our zoning bylaws that we do have, because our OCP is like the guiding document. So I'd like to see the other part. Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Browner.
Thanks, Chair. I'm gonna vote against the motion to refer. I think it does require quite a bit of work, and from what the Director of Planning has said, that it would be breaking new ground, because the protocol right now is to base it on dwelling units. So if you're, you know, creating new policy, that's not an easy thing to do. We have this in front of us. We can pass this. We can look at it at another time to make changes, but I think we've got this one in front of us and we can make these changes right now. So I'll be voting against referring it back to staff.
Okay, thank you. Director Hall, any comments? Director Gisborne?
I think there is a big change with what's being proposed, because we're going from having our density based on the number of dwelling units, which is currently in the OCP, to saying you can have as many dwellings as you want. I see that as a big change. And that's why I think there should be something else in the language of the OCP, because if you get rural residential and we're saying for us, you can have as many dwellings as you want as long as you're consistent with OCP, with Vancouver Coastal Health, then is it still rural residential? Is it still low density residential? And that's why I like the total floor area that we can just have as a policy statement for each of those ones to say, hey, for this area, it's say 25% of the property, another area can be 10%, but that would be, you know, based on, you know, more information.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rodden. I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, I would just like to correct the language, because the proposed amending bylaws that staff have put forward would not allow for an unlimited number of dwellings on any property. It allows for a residential dwelling and an accessory dwelling unit subject to servicing. So that's what the proposed amending bylaws say. It's not for an unlimited number of dwellings on a property.
Yeah, I actually, when I read it, had the same interpretation, that it was based on if you had enough water and sewer capacity. It didn't limit the number of units, but maybe I got that wrong. So you're clear, Ms. Rodden, that it doesn't mean you can have as many accessory buildings as you want?
Yes, and when staff interpret the bylaw to people, that's what would be said. But I will remind the directors that part of the recommendation is that staff be directed to hold a public information meeting in Electoral Area A to present the proposed bylaw and seek feedback from the public. And as you can see how the process went with item 8.1 on the agenda with the Texada Island Watershed zoning bylaw, the public feedback often results in amendments to the proposed bylaw, which very well could happen. And I would suggest that that would be the best means to gain feedback, is at those public information meetings.
All right, thank you for your comment. We've had enough discussion, I believe. We're going to move to the motion at hand, so which is to refer this recommendation back to staff. So
I'm confused now.
Why?
Oh, when I read, this is in our staff report, page 14 of 62. The maximum number of dwellings or service buildings per parcel is based on proof of water and sewer servicing that meet provincial standards. And that's replacing one dwelling per hectare, and that's defined in there. So I'm just wondering where it says, you can only have 2 dwellings per hectare. Because when I read maximum number of dwellings or service buildings per parcel is based on proof of water and sewer servicing that meets provincial standards. I see that as, well, you can have a bunch of accessory dwelling units, and that's like I see that as residential flexibility. I see that as a good thing. But if you're going to say that's the maximum number of dwellings, I'm then wondering.
Ms. Rodden, can you define it maybe a little bit better? And I'm thinking maybe it's in the definitions that are for each of the categories. Is that where you?
Yeah, you have to look at the policy through the chair. You need to look at the policy statements and the definitions. But perhaps there's a communication gap here in what provincial standards are. So this policy language from staff's perspective and from networking with jurisdictions across the province is this type of language is not going to result in people running out and building a bunch of homes on a property, because to meet the provincial standards, you have to apply for if you were going to build even one accessory dwelling unit, it's considered a water supply system by Vancouver Coastal Health and by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So you would need to apply for a water license to service those 2 dwellings, or 3 or 4. And you're responsible for doing the water testing, and the septic requirements have to be met. So this is not carte blanche to development of as many homes as you want on your property, because the provincial standards aren't going to allow for that. And but we don't play a role in that. Some RDs do through servicing bylaws, building bylaws. We don't have those bylaws. So the amending bylaws are removing the RD from that equation, because we don't have any authority over it. It's not local government authority in our region. And so we're removing ourselves from that. We don't have any control over it here without building bylaws and subdivision and servicing bylaws.
Okay. Well, we've gone around and around, and
It didn't answer my question though. And I completely agree that once you get 2 dwellings on 1 well, you need to have, you become a water service. And therefore you have to do the testing and all that kind of stuff. And I know multiple people south of town where they've said, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well put, 8 units so that I can, have motorhomes or fifth wheels or tiny cabins or whatever. And that's what the province, but if our OCP says maximum number of dwellings or service buildings per parcel is based on proof of water and sewer servicing that meets provincial standards, then the limit is the provincial standards. And that is replacing our previous statement, which was 1 dwelling per hectare. So the way I see that from our end is we're saying, if you want to build 20 dwellings or an apartment building or whatever, you got to go and get approval from Vancouver Coastal Health. That's my understanding of what's before us. Is that correct?
Ms. Rodden, any further comments?
Once again, the definitions are there. An accessory dwelling unit is defined, doesn't include apartment building, doesn't include RVs. And it has to be smaller than the residential dwelling. So I think
Okay.
It's up to the directors if you support the proposed amending bylaws or not. And if you don't, that's fine. Please direct staff otherwise.
Okay, we're going to move to the motion before us here to refer back to staff. So all those in favor of referring to staff? Director Gisborne, all opposed? Motion's defeated. And now I guess we have to move back to the first recommendation.
Dr. Hollow, Brander, and Lennox opposed.
Yes, Director, Hollow, Brander, and Lennox opposed.
Now back to the main motion.
Okay. So the recommendation before us is to endorse the proposed amendment to Electoral Area A Official Community Plan Bylaw number 500/2015. We have a mover, I think, already.
Yes,
it's been moved and seconded. All right, and we've had discussion. So all those in favor, all opposed, carried unanimously. So we're going to move to the next recommendation, recommending the same thing for bylaw number 465.9/2023 to amend the Electoral Area B OCP number 465. Do I have a mover?
I'll move it.
Director Gisborne, a second. Brander. Discussion.
Just to clarify, we're going to go to public information session. And for most areas, the density will be based on Vancouver Coastal Health's requirements, not ours. So that's what's being proposed. I'm in favor of the motion, but to the point of I want to see what the public comes back with. Is when the public information session happens. And I guess my question is, when we go to public information, like, is there public feedback? Like, are we able, if people say, hey, we want X, Y, or Z, are we going to hear about that, or would they have to come in as a delegation?
That's probably Ms. Rodden again. Is it similar to the Texada process that we saw?
Yes, through the chair at the open house, people will have the opportunity to make specific comment on the bylaw being proposed, and staff will prepare a report that summarizes the feedback that was received, and may make some proposed amendments to the proposed bylaw, similar to what was done for item 8.1 in this agenda.
Great, thank you for the explanation. Any other discussion on the matter? Seeing none, we'll move the recommendation. All those in favor? Carried. Move to number 3, the same intent for Area C OCP number 467. Moved by Director Brander. Director Hollow, seconder. Thank you. Discussion. Don't think we need to go through that again. Thanks, everybody. All those in favor of the recommendation. Very. Thank you, everyone. I don't see any new business. Move to add no delegation showed up yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chair.
And we'll move to question period. I think we have the media on the line here.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Golinsky from the Peak here. Through the chair, I thank the Manager of Planning Services for her explanation of Electoral Area D. I wondered about that, and that's been properly explained, so that's good. My question is, I realize that Savory Island is the next to be going through the official community plan bylaw rewrite. I'm wondering if in the regional district work plan, whether there will be rewrites for any of the electoral area A, B, or C, whether that's in the plans or whether that's in the distance.
I think we'll ask Ms. Rodden to comment. I know there is a bit of a list of who goes first.
Through the chair, yes. Oh my gosh, we could not attempt that all in 1 year. I mean, it takes doing a review and update of official community plan, takes at least 2 years. And the Savory Island OCP is the oldest OCP right now, and it is scheduled for us to initiate a review later this year. But the other OCPs would be years ahead.
I thank the manager through the chair for that response. I was wondering whether these would see rewrites in the near future, and it's been confirmed that they won't. So I appreciate that response. I have no further questions, Chair.
Thank you. Any other online questions or anything? No. Seeing none, I don't see a proposed in-camera session. Call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.